Picture this. Picture this. A massive stone castle stands tall against the horizon. Suddenly, thousands of screaming soldiers charge across an open, flat green field, pushing giant wooden towers right up to the walls, while a barrage of flaming boulders completely shatters the stone defenses in seconds. It looks absolutely epic on the big screen, doesn't it? But what if I told you that almost everything you just pictured is a complete Hollywood lie? The reality of medieval warfare was far darker, significantly slower, and honestly, way more fascinating than anything you have seen in theaters. Stick around, because we are about to completely shatter the illusions you have about historical warfare. When you watch a blockbuster movie, attacking an enemy fortress looks like a straightforward foot race. The army lines up on a perfectly manicured lawn. The commander gives a dramatic speech, and everyone sprints right up to the castle walls to plant their ladders. What is completely missing from this picture? Trebuchets. In reality, the castle did not just pop out of flat ground. The defenders spent massive amounts of time digging deep, treacherous ditches all the way around the defensive walls. Sometimes they filled them with water to create moats, but more often, they were dry and packed with sharpened wooden stakes. For an attacking army, just getting to the wall was an absolute nightmare. You could not simply roll a giant, heavy wooden siege tower up to the stone. You had to spend weeks filling in those massive ditches with dirt, rocks, and wood, all while the defenders were actively shooting at you. It was miserable, slow, and highly deadly work. Let us move on to the artillery. We all love a good trebuchet scene. The giant arm swings up, launches a massive flaming boulder, and it smashes into the castle wall, instantly turning the solid stone into a pile of crumbling dust. The attackers then casually walk through the giant hole, but medieval walls were not made of drywall. They were incredibly thick, often filled with a core of rubble that absorbed impacts beautifully, while a concentrated bombardment over weeks or months could eventually create a breach. Catapults and trebuchets were not the instant wall destroyers Hollywood wants you to believe. Instead, their main job was often to launch projectiles over the walls entirely. They were throwing rocks to smash through wooden roofs, or even launching dead, diseased animals and barrels of human waste into the courtyard to spread sickness among the defenders. The goal was to make life inside the castle as terrifying and unbearable as possible. Now, imagine the attackers finally make it to the wall and start climbing their ladders. What happens next in the movies? The defenders inevitably tip over a giant cauldron of boiling oil, melting the poor soldiers below. It is a classic cinematic trope. In fact, if you search the internet for 5 misconceptions about medieval sieges and movies, you will find that this specific myth is widely debunked, and for good reason. Olive oil or animal fat was incredibly expensive and highly valuable as a food source. Nobody was going to waste precious calories pouring it on someone's head when they were trying to survive a long, brutal siege. Plus, keeping a giant vat of oil boiling on a narrow, windy castle wall is incredibly dangerous for the defenders themselves. Instead, they used much cheaper, more practical alternatives. They dropped heavy rocks, which were free and everywhere. They poured boiling water, which was extremely cheap to heat up. Sometimes they even dumped boiling sand or quicklime, which would slip right through the gaps in the attacker's armor and cause unbearable burns. Whenever you see a fight break out during a cinematic siege, every single soldier seems to whip out a shiny, perfect longsword and starts clashing blades. While swords look incredibly cool on camera, they were not the primary weapon of choice for the vast majority of soldiers in a real siege scenario. Think of a sword like a modern-day pistol. It is a backup weapon, a sidearm you use when things get unexpectedly close. If you are trying to push an enemy off a tall ladder or hold a narrow breach in the wall, a sword lacks the reach you desperately need. The real stars of medieval combat were polearms, spears, halberds, and crossbows. A spear allows you to stand comfortably behind the safety of your wall and thrust at the people trying to climb up. Crossbows were absolute game changers because they could punch through armor with terrifying force from a safe distance, and they required very little training to use effectively. The average infantryman was handing out damage from afar, not engaging in elegant sword duels. Finally, we have to talk about the pacing. In a movie, the siege starts in the morning, and by sunset, the king is dead, the castle has fallen, and the heroes are celebrating. The reality is that sieges were incredibly dragged-out affairs. They were not fast-paced action sequences. They were agonizing waiting games. The #1 killer in a medieval siege was not a sword or a catapult. It was starvation and disease. An attacking army would often just surround the castle, cut off all the supply lines, set up their own camp, and wait. They waited for the defenders to run out of food and fresh water. Sometimes this took months, or even over a year, and the attackers had it just as bad. Sitting in a muddy encampment for months with thousands of other men and animals meant that diseases like dysentery would sweep through the attacking army, sometimes killing more men than the actual battle. The most successful sieges often ended not with a dramatic final charge, but with a quiet negotiation because both sides were simply too sick and hungry to keep going. So the next time you are sitting in a dark theater watching a king casually smash down a fortress in an afternoon, you'll know the messy, gritty, and fascinating truth behind how it actually happened. The real history of medieval warfare is always more complex than fiction. And honestly, that is what makes it so incredibly interesting to explore. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth with me today, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out and ensures you never miss out on more deep dives into the realities of the past. Thank you so much for spending your time with HistoryHearth, and I will see you in the next one.